So, yesterday, Rishi Sunak, the UK Prime Minister, stood outside number 10 Downing Street and announced that the UK general election will take place on July the 4th, 2024. Political pundits were feverishly excited, even as the country as a whole covered up a barely suppressed yawn. Hardly ever in living memory will an election have taken place that so clearly had such a foregone conclusion, but nevertheless with so little excitement or anticipation attached to it. That's because, very consistently since Boris Johnson's Partygate scandal, the electorate had been counting out time for when they could give the Conservatives the thrashing that they felt that they deserved. Sometimes such sentiments are just a passing annoyance, to be replaced by pragmatism or hope by election day, and sometimes it's just a rotten stench in the air that just gets worse and worse. All the signs are that in 2024 it's very much the latter. And as if to launch the process with exactly the right symbolism, the Prime Minister demonstrated the governing party's utter uselessness by giving his speech in the pouring rain without having even organised an umbrella. Not only that, but because the announcement was trailed well in advance, his opponents had organised themselves, entirely predictably because it's been done before, to play very loudly while he was speaking the anthem used by Tony Blair in the 1997 election, where a drubbing was delivered to the then John Major government. But in that case, there was some enthusiasm in the country for the new government. Labour at the time seemed to be full of energy and ideas. Blair was seen as charismatic and capable. This time, the country is resolved to get rid of the Tories, but it seems to have remarkably little feeling about the replacements. Keir Starmer's Labour Party doesn't inspire them, but at least they've successfully got to the point where they don't terrify them either, which they believe will be enough, and by all accounts the country believes it as well. Labour managed a less than perfect start themselves, launching a campaign video that managed to misspell the word switch in the phrase switched on GB Energy. Oops, but that won't endure anything like the picture of the Prime Minister as drowned rat is going to endure. As we go into the first day of the election campaign, both sides inherit a 5-point list. No doubt these will be built on during the campaign, particularly since Sunak's 5-point list was meant to be his current to-do list, not his long-term vision. So his list was this: 1. Halve inflation. 2. Grow the economy. 3. Reduce debt. 4. Cut waiting lists, NHS waiting lists in other words. And 5, stop the boats, by which he means end illegal immigration. The economic news of the last few days hasn't been bad, so that is something, but it won't make the slightest difference. It caught everyone off guard that Sunak decided to go now, when the Conservatives are still so far behind in the polls, but then nobody's much expecting that position to improve, at least outside of the actual election campaign, where one might expect the positions to tighten during it, once Labour gets more critical scrutiny. So the reasoning was presumably, well, why wait? Now on the other side, the Labour Party's 5-point to-do list is this: 1. Get Britain building again. 2. Switch on Great British Energy, their intended privatised renewable energy company. 3. Get the NHS back on its feet, however you choose to measure that. 4. Take back our streets. Tony Blair, you'll remember, was known for the campaign promise, tough on crime and tough on the causes of crime. In the last couple of days, it was announced that police had been asked to ease up on arresting people because there weren't many places left in the prisons. Gives you some sort of context for that one. And then the 5th one, break down the barriers to opportunity. Now, those Labour ones, because they were framed as more ambitious long-term goals, are equally framed with bigger, more compelling language although it's not immediately obvious what any of them really means in detail. But arguably that is what the campaign is for. What will the Conservatives' bigger mission 5-point list look like? It's kind of hard to imagine, because after so long in power, the overwhelming impression from the lot of them is that they are simply tired, divided, fractious, and pretty much out of ideas. A record number of them have announced they'll be standing down in this election, preferring to go relatively gracefully, rather than suffer the indignity of losing and having all those opponents jeering gleefully at them at the election night count. The ones that are left are hoping that Labour will trip up relatively quickly once we are in government, while the Conservatives will then be able to regroup, choose new leadership, and re-emerge invigorated. Yeah, it took rather longer than that last time this happened, but who knows? Are there any chances of an upset at the last minute? Well, of course. Labour could still lose this. After all, in 1992, everyone thought that Labour was headed to victory then, under second-time contender Neil Kinnock. He had not persuaded the country first time around, when he was opposing Margaret Thatcher. But second time around, people thought that he had matured, he had become more convincing, and, of course, he was up against the rather less high-octane John Major. But then, relatively at the last minute, Labour had a huge rally in Sheffield where, briefly, the mask slipped, Kinnock came across as more lightweight, and that was it. Right at the last minute, literally, the mood of the country simply flipped. And John Major won a bare majority of around 20. Labour was pushed back once again into opposition. It could have turned out to have been the worst thing that ever happened to the Tories. They became fractious and ill-disciplined in government because the small majority gave the malcontents much more power. And within a very short time, the country decided, yeah, we made a mistake, and just bided its time until the moment they could correct that mistake, which they then did in the landslide that brought Tony Blair to power. That could happen again if Starmer puts a serious foot wrong, or his fragile cabinet of unknowns breaks discipline in a serious way in this election campaign. But it's hard to imagine, because by all accounts the country is already in that state where really all they want to do is give the current lot a right good kicking. This will be helped by Reform UK, the splinter group to the right of the Tories. They provide a convenient home for protest votes from Conservatives who want to register their displeasure, but not at the cost of actually voting Labour. Reform UK on current polling are taking significant votes from Tories, although their campaign agenda isn't especially registering as something distinctive and attractive enough to turn them into an actual contender rather than a spoiler. The challenge for them is the same as it is for all such parties, including the Liberal Democrats and the Greens, that the UK's first past the post system will deliver them so few actual parliamentary seats that they never get the momentum to be able to project themselves as potentially credible alternatives. The Liberal Democrats will be both hoping for a minority Labour result and probably fearing exactly that result in equal measure. After all, the last time the winning party was in a minority, they ended up forming a coalition with it. So David Cameron and Nick Clegg, the first coalition in UK living memory, and that was exactly why the Liberal Democrats got trounced at the next election and have muddled along with pretty much 2 members of Parliament and a dog ever since. Not only that, but then some would uncharitably add, they then went ahead and made the dog party leader. I mean, the UK has just been going through the detail of the shocking and disgraceful Post Office Horizon scandal, where hundreds of post office branch operators were prosecuted wrongly for theft when the actual thing at fault was a systemic IT failure. Who was in government at the time? Well, it was the Tory Lib Dem coalition. And what post in government did Ed Davey, the leader, have at the time? Why, he was the Postal Affairs Minister, since you ask. The Lib Dems will certainly pick up a few seats at the expense of the Tories, undoubtedly. But my guess is that most of them would hope to end up as a strong opposition party post-election, not being wooed to be part of Keir Starmer's government. And that's about it, really. Almost all quite predictable. It's just that we have to wade through 6 weeks of campaigning noise before we finally get to the end result. An excellent excuse, you might think, for an extended summer foreign holiday. I couldn't possibly comment.